that you are here. Is the sound okay for everybody? Good. We had not planned to stream this, but Father just said, you know, I can set that up in 5 minutes. So I have contacted the 3 people who inquired about it by text. Hopefully they'll get it and they can join us. But if any of you know someone who wanted to see this and was not able to come in person, send them a text. It's on the YouTube station for Immaculate Conception ABQ, and then they will be able to watch it. Then later, we will link to that from our website, so you can watch it later if you want to see it again, or someone else could watch it later. So we are very grateful, and we are grateful to Immaculate Conception, the parish here, and I'm sorry, Father, I don't remember your name. I'm Father Steve. Thank you so much for welcoming us here. It's wonderful to be in downtown Albuquerque, also at the Archbishop's home. I feel very privileged. We are going to have a small reception afterwards so we can have coffee and visit, and have some community building afterwards. Downstairs, we're going to go out this door, across the little courtyard there, and then downstairs into the hall for some coffee and cookies and good companionship. I am very grateful to the Archbishop who agreed to do a program for us on nuclear disarmament. It's an especially important topic right at the moment. We didn't know how important and pressing it would be, and here we are. We are so grateful that he has agreed to come. And with that, I welcome Archbishop.
Thank you very much, Marie. I'm very grateful to you, and I'm grateful to DEI, Mary McLeod, and to the whole organization for having me again. I think I spoke a few years ago, and I don't remember what I said, but I remember it was at some place we had a big DEI event. And so it's nice to be back again, and it's nice to be here with Father Rosera, our pastor here, and my landlord. So I'm glad that it's nice to be with you too. Claudia Apodaca invited me to do this, so you were very wise, and I have a very full schedule, and so Claudia called, and so I couldn't say no to Claudia. So I'm glad that you invited me, and I'm very pleased to be with you today. I oftentimes feel a little bit like a skunk at a lawn party talking about nuclear weapons. They're so destructive, and especially with the geopolitical reality today, it kind of is not an easy topic, and most of us probably for decades, if you're anything like me, haven't thought much about it and don't want to think much about it. I might also be more like a skunk at a lawn party because I know there are many in New Mexico that I've met anyway who pull for the Dallas Cowboys, but I'm pulling for San Francisco 49ers. So we had a lady at the cathedral this morning. She had the big Dallas sweatshirt and the Dallas hat and all the Dallas. And she said, "Oh, thank you for the mail." I said, "You're most welcome, and I hope your team loses." So that was not the most cordial greeting I've given people after Mass, but in any case. So I'll give my presentation. This is a formal presentation, so I'll give it now. And then I hope that it's helpful for you and for all of us. And then after that, I'll stop, and then we can have some questions and answers for a little bit if you like, and then we'll go down to the reception. I have to get back to Santa Fe, so I won't stay too long at the reception, but I can stay for a little bit. I see that Ann Avalon is here. Ann is the head of our Justice and Peace Commission for the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, as well as the Family Life Office, the Pro-Life Office. And so Ann had a very significant role to play in the pastoral letter that we wrote and put out on January 11th of 2022. And Ann was very significant in that, along with 3 others who are part of my, you might say, writing committee. And so I'm happy to thank Ann publicly for all her work on the pastoral letter, which I'm pleased to say has had some traction. You know, again, it's not something that people like to think about, but the nuncio at the United Nations, representing the Vatican, the Holy See, he invited me to give a homily at the UN last September, which I did, and I've spoken gave the Pax Christi a keynote for their 50th anniversary here in the United States, And then I went to Rome last December to participate in Pax Christi International, meeting from people all over the world. And I gave a presentation, a brief one, among others, during that particular event. And then we also, Cardinal Czerny, who is the head of the Integral Development of Peoples back there in Rome and the Vatican, he was there for the final Mass. So he and Alessio are very much involved in this work and a variety of efforts, but certainly with nuclear disarmament. So let me give the formal presentation, and then we can have questions and answers, comments, contributions, criticisms, whatever you want. Just don't throw anything. That's all I ask. On January 11th then of last year, my collaborators and I issued the pastoral letter, Living in the Light of Christ's Peace, a conversation toward nuclear disarmament. In that letter, we voiced the fears of many that the brewing war of aggression on part of Russia against Ukraine would heighten the risk of the use of nuclear weapons being used for the first time since World War II. Sadly, as we all know, on February 24th of last year, saw the beginning of that war and the rattling of nuclear sabers. Just a few weeks later, on March 7th, 2022, the 61-year-old mayor of Hostomel, Yuri Prolipko, was killed by Russian snipers, along with 2 others, as he distributed bread and medicine to the sick of his city. Mr. Prolipko was hailed as a real hero and a servant of his people, and rightly so. He gave his life for his suffering people and exemplified our Lord's teaching that no one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends, from John 15:13. Another way of expressing this truth is to say that Yuri was in a right relationship with his people. This idea of being in right relationship is referred to in Scripture as biblical justice. The whole trajectory of the Scriptures and a constant theme of the Second Vatican Council sees justice not only from an ethical perspective, but more, from the perspective of being in right relationship, a covenant relationship with God, with our fellow human beings, and with all of creation. The late Father Walter Burkhardt puts it well. Those who read in the sacred text a surely personal, individualistic morality have not understood the Torah, have not sung the Psalms, have not been burned by the prophets, have not perceived the implications and the very burden of Jesus' message, and must inevitably play fast and loose with St. Paul. The social focus of God's book is evident on the very first page. The song of creation is its overture. Our incredibly imaginative God did not have in mind isolated units, autonomous entities. God had in mind a people, a human family, a community of persons, a body genuinely one. Living in right relationship with God, with others, and with our common home is what my pastoral letter seeks to promote. It highlights the urgent need to begin, rejuvenate, and sustain a conversation that leads to right relationships and to peace in our world. In particular, my pastoral letter raises the urgent question of nuclear disarmament, since nuclear weapons pose the ultimate and indeed permanent destruction of any kind of relationships at all, not to mention right relationships. For many of us, myself included, the last 5 decades or so have lulled us into a false sense of security relative to the clear and present danger posed by nuclear weapons. This all changed for me 5 years ago when, in September of 2017, I traveled to Japan and visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was a somber, sobering experience, as I realized that on August 6, 1945, humanity crossed the line into the darkness of the nuclear age. We can now kill billions of people instantly and even destroy the world and civilization in a flash. The reality of this evil becomes very real as you walk through Hiroshima and Nagasaki today. In one exhibit, I read about school children in Hiroshima who on that fateful morning of August of 1945 ran to the windows, attracted by a bright light. Little did they know that they were running to their deaths. either instantaneously incinerated or dying later in agonizing pain. Normally, light brings new life and clearer vision, just as we celebrated today in our readings with Isaiah and Corinthians and Matthew. Not that day. Sadly, the light generated by the first nuclear explosion used in war brought only destruction and death. Then I remembered when I was a young boy in October of 1962. I was 12 years old. Now you know how old I am. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, I recall looking up at the sky on my way home from school to see if any Russian planes were about to drop atomic bombs on me and my friends. I became so frightened that I ran all the way home. Those Japanese school children had no time to be afraid. They had no time to run, and sadly, there was no home left to run to. Later, when I walked through Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park and stood before the incinerated Jimbako Dome, it dawned on me that I had not really thought about the possibility of nuclear war since then, or even felt fear over the nuclear threat. Those childhood days when we practiced for nuclear war by hiding under our desks, maybe you remember that, or locating the nearest bomb shelter, of which Immaculate Conception is one, are dim memories. But Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought them all back vividly. Within a day or two of my return to New Mexico, some friends came to visit me up in Santa Fe. I took them to the New Mexico History Museum. There I saw a different exhibit with a different story. With Hiroshima and Nagasaki still fresh in my mind, I read about the Manhattan Project, the development of the Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratories, and the creation of the nuclear bombs that we were eventually dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I visited these displays much differently than I had on a previous visit before I had been to Japan. It was eerie to see photos of Little Boy and Fat Man, the nicknames given to the actual Japan bombs, when I had just been in those very places only months before. I knew now what those bombs did to our Japanese sisters and brothers. When my friends and I stepped outside into our beautiful city of Santa Fe, I noticed how peaceful it was. Santa Fe, the city of the holy faith of St. Francis of Assisi, a faith which inspired him to be an instrument of Christ's peace to the world, is home to Nuestra Señora de la Paz, Our Lady of Peace. I felt disturbed by our history, the long, dark legacy of building those bombs, and many thousands of nuclear weapons since then. We are the people who designed and built these weapons of mass destruction. We were the first to use them in war. We must be the people to dismantle them and make sure they're never used again. That day in Santa Fe, it seemed blasphemous to me that we could create weapons with the potential to destroy our entire planet, our common home, given to us by a loving God to be cared for and nurtured so that all might live in God's peace. It became clear to me that the Archdiocese of Santa Fe must be part of a strong peace initiative, one that would help make sure that these weapons would never be used again, that we would never destroy our planet or one another, that instead we would clean up our poisoned land and fund global institutions that resolve all international conflicts through nonviolent means, such as dialogue and negotiation. Historically, the Archdiocese of Santa Fe has been part of a peace initiative, especially given our role in the creation and manufacture of these weapons. I believe that it is time to rejuvenate that peace work. I think we need to sustain a serious conversation in New Mexico and across the nation about nuclear disarmament. We can no longer deny or ignore the dangerous predicament we've created for ourselves. We need to start talking about it with one another, all of us, and figure out concrete steps toward abolishing nuclear weapons and ending the nuclear threat. If we care about humanity, if we care about our planet, if we care about the God of peace and human conscience, then we must start a public conversation on these urgent questions and find a new path toward nuclear disarmament. The gospel points to a conversation that God entered into with all of humanity. By becoming one of us, God engages us in a divine conversation that, if we enter into, would ultimately free us from sin and death, a conversation consummated on the cross and brought to fruition in the resurrection, a conversation that leads to right relationships. It is in the light of the resurrection that we are called to live in peace with one another, freed from hatred, jealousy, lust for power, greed, and all those evils that cause wars and prevent right relationships. It is a conversation that I pray all nations can initiate, rejuvenate, and sustain on the geopolitical level. The church is called to sustain the same dialogue with all people, a dialogue that reaches out to all individuals who seek to live in harmony and in right relationship with each other. I believe that the first step in this conversation is to listen. Pope Francis has mentioned more than once to us bishops that while we are teachers of the faith, a good teacher listens first. We must listen to the poor, the disenfranchised, and those on the periphery. We must listen to the often forgotten victims of wars, famine, and persecution in such places as Syria, Sudan, South Sudan, Nigeria, Yemen, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Somalia, Myanmar, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, as well as to those suffering in Ukraine. We must listen to those being trafficked and to those dying from preventable illnesses. We must listen to forced immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers fleeing gang violence, persecution, political and economic hardship. And we must listen to those at home enduring domestic violence, addiction, and extreme poverty. And we are called to listen to those voices calling for nuclear disarmament, since the current stockpile of over 13,000 weapons in the world today poses a real risk, intentional or accidental, of destroying all of civilization. The way of the cross calls us to humble ourselves, to rid ourselves of pride and selfishness, and to give of ourselves freely to others, as Yuri Polipko did last March, as we engage the process of dialogue on the global level. When we genuinely listen to these voices, the cry of the poor, the destitute and persecuted, we're taking the first steps in a constructive conversation that will find answers and create true change in our world. Sadly, our world too often turns a deaf ear to these problems, preferring to remain safe, isolated, and unaware. We Christians believe that the Word became flesh so that we might be freed from the chains of selfishness, to give of ourselves to each other, seeing that we are all children of God. And appropriately today is Pope Francis has designated this third Sunday as the Word of God Sunday, when we really reverence the Word of God. In particular, I am aware that many would say that to think we can achieve multilateral, verifiable nuclear disarmament is naive. But who is it that is really naive? Robert McNamara, Defense Secretary during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, said that human civilization survived only by luck. Counting on luck is not a winning strategy. The history of nuclear weapons is replete with near misses, miscalculations, and accidents. With the war in Ukraine, we are now facing the most serious nuclear threats since the middle 1980s. Isn't it the height of naivete to think that humanity can survive on into the future as long as nuclear weapons exist? There are those who would say that conversation and dialogue are signs of weakness. However, I subscribe to St. Francis de Sales' belief that nothing is so strong as gentleness, nothing so gentle as real strength. Is not the gentle persuasion of a productive conversation more effective than all the strong-arm tactics of politics and military might? Real peace-making begins only after the fighting ends. Pope Francis, who strikingly called the mere possession of nuclear weapons immoral, speaks eloquently about the importance of conversation and dialogue. He says, "The Word became flesh in order to dialogue with us." God does not desire to carry on a monologue, but a dialogue. For God himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is dialogue, an eternal and infinite communion of love and life. By the coming of Jesus, the person of the Word made flesh, into our world, God showed us the way of encounter and dialogue. Indeed, he made that way incarnate in himself, so that we might know it and follow it in trust and in hope. On the international level, too, the Pope tells us, there is the risk of avoiding dialogue, the risk that this complex crisis will lead to taking shortcuts rather than setting out on the longer paths of dialogue. Yet only those paths can lead to the resolution of conflicts and to lasting benefits for all. I am convinced that this dialogue that Pope Francis speaks of is what is needed in our world today. The solution to our divisions and controversies is not violence and war, but the honest and sincere efforts of human beings to encounter one another in fruitful conversations that lead to peace. And a dialogue about nuclear disarmament is an essential part of this conversation. For many decades now, the Church has condemned nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war. Support for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is solidly rooted in Catholic social teaching on war and peace, and has been emphasized by Pope St. John XXIII, the documents of Vatican II, Pope St. Paul VI, Pope St. John Paul II, the late Pope Benedict XVI, and most recently our current Holy Father, Pope Francis. In addition, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has advocated for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Worldwide, verifiable, multilateral nuclear disarmament is necessary not only to prevent the demise of civilization as we know it, but also to promote a better life for all of us today, especially the poor, those on the peripheries and the disenfranchised. In April of 1953, President Eisenhower, the former five-star military commander, famously said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron." End quote. Now, 70 years later, will the war in Ukraine be humanity's cross of iron? Last Monday was the 62nd anniversary of Eisenhower's famous military-industrial complex speech. That is better stated, perhaps, as an iron triangle of military, industrial, congressional complex. This is particularly true of New Mexico, where its congressional delegation has repeatedly promoted expanding nuclear weapons programs as a jobs program. But Pope Francis has unequivocally stated the possessing of human weapons is immoral. No amount of money can explain that away. But who is it that really benefits from that money? Los Alamos County is the 11th richest county in the United States, but borders some of the poorest communities in the nation. Why is it that the land of enchantment stays perennially at the bottom of so many socioeconomic indicators, such as the most children living in poverty and dead last in quality of education? The Department of Energy is going to spend $9.4 billion in New Mexico this year, 10% more than the state's entire operating budget of $8.5 billion. A full 70% of that DOE money is for core nuclear weapons research and production programs, while much of the remainder is for dumping radioactive wastes from plutonium bomb production. What good will this do for the average New Mexican? Just imagine if that money was spent creating jobs that truly benefited New Mexicans, such as statewide wildfire protection, protecting our precious water resources, and making our public schools something to be truly proud of. In 1963, a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Pope St. John XXIII said, "We are deeply distressed to see the enormous stocks of armaments that have been and continue to be manufactured. Justice, right reason, and the recognition of man's dignity cry out insistently for a cessation to the arms race. Nuclear weapons must be banned." A year later, the Second Vatican Council said, "The arms race is an utterly treacherous trap for humanity, and one which ensnares the poor in an intolerable degree. We see that within our very own archdiocese, New Mexico is the only state with production of plutonium pit bomb cores for nuclear weapons, and at the same time, the only state with a permanent dump for those radioactive plutonium wastes. All of this in one of the few states with the majority of people of color. As the world sleepwalks into a new and more dangerous nuclear arms race, the budgets for nuclear weapon programs at the Los Alamos and Sandia labs have more than doubled over the last decade. The resulting economic inequality is stark. Los Alamos County has the most millionaires per capita in the country. In contrast, New Mexico has slid from 37th in per capita income in 1959 to 46th in 2022, contrary to the economic propaganda of the nuclear weapons industry. Los Alamos County has the lowest rate of children living in poverty in the USA. New Mexico has the most, with 1 out of every 4 children in poverty. Los Alamos County has been ranked as the very best county to live in. New Mexico has been ranked dead last in quality of life for children. When Jesus sent the 72 disciples ahead of him, he told them to speak the words of peace to those they met. At his Last Supper, he spoke again of peace, saying, "My peace is my gift to you." When he rose from the dead, his first words to his disciples were words of peace. As followers of Jesus, and in keeping with the beliefs of world religions, I hope we can speak the words of peace with one another and translate that gospel conversation into concrete action for nuclear disarmament across the world. I think again of those young children in Japan who ran to the window to see the bright light of the Hiroshima bomb just as they were incinerated. That light was not the light of peace, but a false light of death and destruction. Those children's voices cry out to us, for as T.S. Eliot said in Little Gidding, "And what the dead had no speech for when living, they can tell you being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living." Jesus came into the world as the true light. He came to lead us out of the darkness of violence, death, and destruction. In doing so, he is the light of the world. His light is the exact opposite of the bright light of a nuclear weapon. His light is the true light of universal love, the light of universal compassion, the light of universal peace. His light is the light of total nonviolence. His light of peace enables us to see a way forward on the path of life toward a new future of peace, a world without nuclear weapons. The Hiroshima bombing occurred on, as you know, August 6, 1945. It was the Feast of the Transfiguration. A few weeks later, in September of 1945, Dorothy Day called the U.S. atomic bombing of Hiroshima the anti-transfiguration. In the story of the Transfiguration, Jesus takes 3 disciples up the mountain, and there is transfigured into bright white light. His disciples are terrified and fall to the ground as if dead. But he touches them and says, "Rise, do not be afraid." These witnesses saw who Jesus really is, the light of the world and the healing light of peace. As his followers, we choose not to live in the darkness of violence and in the shadow of the threat of nuclear war anymore. The light of Christ's peace is leading us out of the valley of the shadow of death, where we have wandered for far too long, building and developing thousands of nuclear weapons in preparation for nuclear war. In the light of Christ's peace, we can see a new promised land of peace, love, and nonviolence. If we dare follow the transfigured risen Christ, we can put aside our fears and rise and walk forward into that promised land of peace, into a new world without nuclear weapons. It is in the light of Christ's peace that we see one another as truly sisters and brothers. God did not create us to be enemies of each other, but as members of one human family, all God's children, sharing this beautiful common home. We need not threaten anyone, anywhere, any longer with nuclear warfare. We must take concrete steps to begin this process of disarmament, dismantling our weapons, cleaning up our land, and spending our enormous resources instead on structures of international, nonviolent conflict resolution, and ending the causes of warfare itself, such as hunger, poverty, racism, and greed. In the light of Christ's peace, we can see a new future for the world, a new nonviolent world where we do not build and store nuclear weapons, but where everyone can live in peace without the threat of nuclear war. In this new world, we spend our resources ending hunger and poverty, improving our schools and healthcare, securing life-giving employment for everyone, and teaching everyone the life of peace and nonviolence. If we pursue this conversation and take up the task of nuclear disarmament, we will not only make our land and our world more peaceful and more secure, but we will also finally learn to live fully in the light of Christ's peace. In Gerard Manley Hopkins' poem, The Grandeur of God, he tells us that the earth is constantly renewed because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. The light of those bright wings is filled with wisdom, prudence, and courage that enable us to sustain a fruitful conversation on peace that will renew, refresh, and invigorate our poor world, so often bent by violence and the threat of nuclear war. The light of those bright wings is the light of Christ that shines in the darkness. It is Christ, the morning star, who, coming back from death's domain, has shed his peaceful light on humanity. It is in this light, the light of Christ's peace, that we undertake this conversation on nuclear disarmament. We pray that we will vanquish the instruments of war by ourselves becoming instruments of Christ's peace. But it is not enough that we become instruments of peace, as important as that is. No, we must take up the cause of worldwide nuclear disarmament with an urgency that befits the seriousness of this cause and the dangerous threat that looms over all of humanity and our planet. I call on all of us, children of God, to take up the challenge of nuclear disarmament by engaging the vital conversation that will lead to concrete action steps toward this goal. I know I'm asking quite a lot, but so did Jesus when he sent out the disciples 2 by 2 on their mission of peace. And like those disciples, we are missioned by Christ, empowered by Christ, and strengthened by Christ for the task at hand. Mr. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, expressed the disappointment of so many of us that the recent conference on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons failed to reach a consensus yet again. He was quoted as saying that the fraught international environment and the heightened risk of nuclear weapons being used by accident or through miscalculation demand urgent and resolute action. The Secretary General appealed to all states to use every avenue of dialogue, diplomacy, and negotiation to ease tensions, reduce nuclear risk, and eliminate the nuclear threat once and for all. He poignantly stated a few weeks ago that geopolitical tensions are reaching new highs. Competition is trumping cooperation and collaboration. Distrust has replaced dialogue, and disunity has replaced disarmament. States are seeking false security and stockpiling and spending hundreds of billions of dollars on doomsday weapons that have no place on our planet. The famous General Omar Bradley sadly anticipated the dangerous state of affairs we are now in our world community. He said, "Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about war than we know about peace. More about killing than we know about living. We have grasped the mystery of the atom and rejected the Sermon on the Mount." It was in that sermon that Jesus laid out for us a path to peace, the path to seeing God, the path to right relationships. We do well to follow Jesus, to be true peacemakers before it is too late. Blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are we when we speak words of peace in a conversation that will lead to a lasting and just peace in our war-torn and fragile world, our common home. May God bless us all. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I warned you, not easy stuff, but I took out a lot of the statistics. You know them all anyway, the power of nuclear arms. And my brother Bishop, Archbishop Paul Etchen of Seattle, in his archdiocese, they have 8 Trident submarines. And just one of those Trident submarines, just one of them, has enough firepower to destroy civilization in the entire world. There are approximately 16 warheads on the submarines, and each of those warheads has another subset of warheads. And so it's I don't know the exact number, but it's rather incredible the power just one of them has. So it's a difficult topic, but I'm really hoping that here in the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, we can get some traction on talking about it. And I think that conversation is something that, we don't have to worry about. And it's not a debate. I'm not encouraging a debate, but rather a conversation. People will have other ideas, and certainly we're not advocating for instantaneous unilateral disarmament. That would be suicide. But we're advocating to get on a path where we can eventually find a way to have nuclear disarmament in the world. Granted, today, the prospects of that seem dimmer than ever. As you know, they're about to reset the atomic clock. I think it's going to be Tuesday. And I don't know, it's probably going to get closer to midnight is my guess with all that's going on right now. So it's a difficult time. I was talking to Marie before, and there was a time when we really had some productive conversations with Russia, for example. But Marie was mentioning that since Putin took power, that those conversations dried up. And we have had success. You know, it's not completely a pipe dream. You know, in the 80s, there was a time when we had over 80,000 nuclear armaments in the world. And through the different treaties, we've reduced that stockpile from 80,000 to a little over 13,000 today. But again, you know, we know that Iran is certainly signaling their intention to have nuclear capabilities. China is probably one of the bigger threats now today. They want to have parity with the US and Russia. They have 300, 400, 500 nuclear arms, but they want to, by 2035, I believe, they want to have parity with us. So there's a lot, you know, tensions with Ukraine, obviously, and now just lately, you know, we've just in the last week seen former Russian political leaders and a current close confidant of Putin saying that if the West produces offensive weapons for Ukraine, that'll be a worldwide catastrophe. So these are, we don't know if this is, you know, saber rattling or what they intend, but so it's a very complicated time that we're living in. But I don't think we should let that cow us or let it diminish the importance of, if anything, maybe this is a good time to initiate and sustain this conversation. Now that people are more aware of the potential damage that can be done, the terrible situation we've gotten ourselves in. So I admit that it's a difficult time. I admit that it's a difficult conversation, but I think that we in Santa Fe have an important role to play. And I think that we, as an archdiocese, who care about living out the gospel, that we have, I think that God has given us a role to play, since we've here in this archdiocese have attracted those really geniuses, scientists and engineers and all, who have been able to do great things in one sense, but we need them to do even greater things in terms of peace building instead of war making. So it's complicated, and I know that it involves many other issues such as jobs and things of that nature, but I think that it's nonetheless we have to face the challenge squarely. So let me just open it up for any questions, comments, observations that you might want to make. And Father Steve has a microphone, so just raise your hand. There's a lady there, Steve, right to your left. If you have any questions or comments, whatever.
Yes, thanks, Archbishop Wester, for your work and for your presentation today. And I was grateful that you mentioned Eisenhower's speech, which is very important, and the military-industrialized complex. So I guess I think that probably the biggest pusher of all of this, while we say it is protection, it's not. At this point, I think it's a runaway industrial complex of corporations and money. And as you noted, our senators keep pushing for this. It's similar to the oil and gas industry in this state and in our country. Which is causing climate change. So my question is, where are the USCCB in terms of this, and really a reorganization or reprioritization at the federal level on budget and in confronting these corporations that are for destruction and not for the common good.
Thank you. You certainly raised an important question, important issue. As they say, whoever they are, follow the money. This is, a lot of money is involved. And I remember in the first Iraq war, I got a fax and it said, for me to invest in stocks in munitions, this would be a good time to invest in that. And I'm sure it was, and I'm sure a lot of people made a lot of money. And I'm sure people are making a lot of money today with the Ukraine war. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The billions of dollars that are being spent on that war on both sides. So clearly that's an issue. The whole military, political, and economic manufacturing complex are all woven into this. And so that makes it a difficult matter. I think one possibility would be that, yes, we have to keep, speaking our truth and pointing out the necessity of this, of nuclear disarmament. And also, I think we need to show a positive road ahead. For example, I think that our labs could very easily continue very profitably in peacemaking and peaceful usage. Our labs are already doing that. In the pandemic, as I understand it, they did a lot of computer prognostications and, figuring out different systems. And so they're already doing, working with medical science, for example, a lot of computers science. There's a lot that they can do. So it's just a question of transforming what we have. There'll be a transition, as there is in any transition. But I think it's one that would be gradual. It's going to obviously, my sense is there's going to have to be, if we can get traction on it, a continued de-escalation, a continued disarmament slowly, gradually, surely, inexorably, and getting down to, a plateau where we have deterrence. I think it's important to point out, too, I didn't mention in this talk, but the narrative that we're always given is that we have these weapons for deterrence. But the reality is that's never really been our plan. The plan we have very definite from the very beginning. We, and I'm sure Russia has very well laid out plans for first strike capabilities. If we had just purely deterrence, we'd only need 100 or 2 nuclear weapons for deterrence, not thousands. So it's a difficult, it's like moving the Queen Mary. It's not going to be easy, but nonetheless, we have to, we have to work at it. So, but you bring up a good point. The money is a real issue. And here in Santa Fe, I'm conscious of that. A lot of our parishioners, they're getting their paychecks from Los Alamos and Sandia. But again, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. So those paychecks are not going to end. And the few scientists and engineers I've already talked to basically agree with the pastoral letter. They don't dispute the letter. It's just how do we get there? How do we achieve nuclear disarmament? That's the real issue. It's like the military men and women that I've talked to said, well, gee, Archbishop, we want peace more than you because we're going to be the first ones to go in war. We'll be the ones flying to the war zone, not you. So it's interesting, we just presume that automatically that everybody in the military is hawkish, but that's not really true. And I think these quotes from Eisenhower and Omar Bradley are significant because they knew firsthand the power of these, and that was way back when. I'm interested in this movie Oppenheimer. I'm not sure exactly what tack it's going to take. I think it seems like it's going to open up the question even more. And I'm guessing maybe that Oppenheimer did have some huge reservations about all that they were doing and the possible consequences of it. And I've read things that he said, that this is really going to be very tragic, what we've done. I mean, I think he was in the middle of a war effort. That whole thrust, the whole trajectory was to save lives, to win the war, to end the terrible affliction of the Nazis and all that, the Axis powers. So that was a different time, but these scientists were quite conscious of what they had done. And you read reports of when they saw the first test, the Trinity test site and all, that they were filled with awe. And we always talk about awe, fear, and trembling. I thought they had an awe and fear and trembling at what they had unleashed. Of course, if they hadn't done it, it would have been done eventually by somebody. And so these are all these kind of complicated questions. Yes.
How do you engage the church in Russia in a conversation about this, the Orthodox Church?
The church in Russia right now, sadly, the Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church have not enjoyed happy relations the last decades. There's a lot of mistrust, a lot of angst. And now with the Ukraine war, I know Pope Francis has tried to reach out and to have some dialogue, but it's been difficult with at least the official position of the Russian Patriarch, what he's taken vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. So, however, we do have a lot of contact and with Archbishop Boris Golosnov, I believe you pronounce it, a wonderful man. He spoke to us at the USCCB last November, and I went to one of his churches there in Baltimore and gave a talk to them on the smaller address about this issue. And so they're very, and we've had 100 of us bishops had a Zoom meeting with the head Ukrainian Catholic patriarch in Ukraine, who remains in Ukraine. He hasn't left. He wants to stay with his people. And we've had talks with him. So we've had those kinds of talks. But in terms of Russia, no. I know that on the diplomatic, I'm sure there's a lot of things going on behind scenes, diplomatically, politically, and with churches and all of that. But what it is, I'm not privy to. If there's any, I'm sure the Vatican is doing its best to communicate, but it's not been easy, frankly. And part of that, I think, is Mr. Putin has supported lately the Russian Orthodox Church. So I think there's a little bit of, my sense is, it's hard to know these things, I'm like Will Rogers, all I know is what I read in the papers. But I think that there seems to be some complicity there at this point. Mary? Well, you might need the mic, I know, but it's still.
I don't need the microphone, being a former teacher.
It helps.
But I will. Okay, so my name is Mary McLeod, and I'm not disputing a thing you say, and I totally disagree with the issue. I wanted to speak for a minute on the personal level. I lived, not born, but raised in Los Alamos. Half of my career in education, 50% Catholic, 50% Los Alamos Public Schools, superintendent of Los Alamos Schools. My sadness about all of this is that I love all of the people I lived with, grew up with, my friends whose fathers and mothers were part of the initial development of the bomb, the continued work in Los Alamos. So I always feel really conflicted when Los Alamos and the statistics about Los Alamos are put out there, because we're not the only problem. It's true to bring it home to our state. But what makes me sad is that the people that I know are really good people, yet it sounds like when you take it to the level of morality and sin, that they've been engaged at that level, and I'm conflicted about that. Second thing is that 30 years of my career in the Bay Area mostly, I was really involved with the United Nations. And I have to say I've lost hope in the ability of an organization like the United Nations to bring us to a place of dialogue. My biggest fear personally for the future of our planet and our people has to do with environmental issues. I think the nuclear issue is a huge issue, but I think the possibility of the environment is likely to kill us all. So I'm not disputing, I just had to say that it makes me sad when Los Alamos is kind of one of the key places it's talked about.
Right. Well, thank you for bringing that up, Mary. I think, you touch on an important point. Certainly, in Catholic moral teaching, we talk about, immediate and proximate and remote participation, obviously. And so from a moral point of view, obviously the intentionality of people working in our labs is not to kill people. Their intention is to create, I'm sure what they see as defensive weapons, that and the kind of trying to protect the status quo. So I'm sure I don't doubt that they're very good people. I know some of them. Some of them are our deacons, are working there in the 2 labs and as engineers or scientists. So I don't think that's, I think I could see somebody possibly not working there because their conscience wouldn't let them, but I can also see somebody working there in good conscience, thinking that they're doing a service to protect the United States because, we're not dealing with an ideal situation. We've crossed the nuclear line, and that once it's done, it's done. And so now we're in the midst of it. So, and again, unilateral disarmament's not what we're looking for. We see now more clearly than ever, however, that nuclear weapons are not protecting us. Not only because of what they could do either accidentally or intentionally, but even what they're already doing. Even their mere existence has really changed radically what the Ukraine war might have been. You just imagine, if there weren't nuclear weapons, if Putin didn't have a button to push and we didn't have a button to push, it would have been completely different, I'm sure, But because of that, the United States, in my opinion, is trying to be very sober and prudent and rational and try to keep things from getting out of hand. The other thing that's scary, frankly, is the advent now of hypersonic delivery systems, which can avoid certain radar detection, or they lessen the time that countries have to react, so that countries will have to react quicker, and thus a greater chance of error and mistake. Artificial intelligence, AI, is being introduced into the nuclear arsenal. So if you think that there's a possibility of miscommunication between human beings, imagine what it would be with artificial intelligence. And so, there's some scary things out there right now, and it's conceivable, hopefully not probable, but conceivable, that the human beings have manufactured their own demise. And so that's why we want to, Back from the Brink is a very important organization that looks for ICANN's, another one, organizations that look for, disarmament. So, no, I have no doubt these are good people. I know they're bright people. And, but again, it's like somebody who makes a car. Well, a lot of people get killed in cars, and pollution is killing people. We know now more than ever that people are dying prematurely because of pollution, that people's brains are being affected, negatively because of pollution. But, we don't say stop making cars. I think it's a question of becoming more and more aware and then working toward, so some would say working at the labs might continue working there, but they might join a group like Pax Christi or DEI or some group to start talking about this and working for nuclear disarmament. So they could be doing both at the same time.
Thank you for your presentation and your words of wisdom. I wonder if you have been able to engage with our congressional delegation, or if the Conference of Bishops is engaged with the administration, having a Catholic president. If any of this notion of dialogue that you are calling for is happening, and what is the reaction on our congressional delegation and on the administration to be open to a dialogue on moral grounds, and also if there's any engagement with the state Senate and House, if there's any political openness to dialogue.
So are you saying on the bishops level, the USCCB level? Did I hear you say?
Either you with the U.S. With the New Mexico congressional delegation, or the New Mexico legislature,
yes,
or the Conference of Bishops with the administration.
Yes, we're planning meetings with Senator Heinrich and others, in our own New Mexico delegation. We realize that this is going. They're very much in favor of keeping that money coming in to the labs, and so that's going to be a hard battle. But we're certainly open to doing that. Also, we're hoping that our little delegation might be able to speak to President Biden as a possibility. I know Dr. Ira Helfand, who's works, very much in this area, is internationally known, was hoping we could do that. I'm not quite sure how to go about that. Ring the bell at 1600 Pennsylvania, said, "Hello, is Mr. Biden home?" But so we can work toward that. One thing, and this is tentative yet, but we are working toward a trip to Japan this August, where Mr. Jay Coughlin, who's the head of Nuke Watch New Mexico, and I, and perhaps others, and maybe some other bishops, I'd like to go speak to the bishops in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Archdiocese of Nagasaki and the Diocese of Hiroshima, and see if we can develop a relationship, so we can learn from them and we can work with them and support them in their efforts, because there's some very strong movements in Japan. Steve Leeper and Sister Philo and others are working very hard to maintain this non-nuclear posture for Japan, and because there's some prime ministers historically have talked about the possibility of developing their own nuclear arsenal. The current prime minister, as I understand it, I think he's from Hiroshima, so I think he is less inclined in that direction, which is good. So we're seeing what we can do in that regard. The USCCB, of course, you remember their 1983 peace pastoral was very significant. And that caused a lot of waves at the time. And even among the bishops, not all the bishops, there was not a unanimous vote. And some of our bishops were former chaplains or generals in the army, and so they have a different view. And so, but it still passed, and that was the big difference now is that in that peace pastoral of 1983, it did allow for deterrence, but we know now that that's a red herring. That's not really what it's about at all. Plus, Pope Francis has changed the moral landscape when he said that even possessing nuclear arms is immoral. So I'm hoping that the USCB, I made an intervention last November, but it was too late for them to do anything. They told me they'd already much set the agenda, it turned out. But I've kind of broken the ice with them anyway, and so I'm going to follow that up and see maybe next June if we can get something to the floor at least as an introductory intervention to talk about nuclear disarmament, have the bishops to talk about it, because that's one thing of the Catholic Church is position. We have churches all over the world. Frankly, our intelligence is better than the CIA in some respects, because we're allowed in places where the CIA isn't, and I'm sure the CIA has their operatives. But I mean, I always had a laugh, this is an aside, but when President Reagan wanted to see the Pope, the Secret Service knocked on the door there and they said, we have to, clear that we have to be here for a day or two. And the Swiss guard said, no, that's not possible. And so then whoever was really said, well, okay, then the president won't visit. He said, oh, okay, that's fine. So he closes the door. Why'd you close the door? I said, well, you said he's not coming. No, well, no, I'm not the authority. I said, well, make up your mind. So, but again, I think there's that attitude, the Vatican doesn't know what they're doing, and I'm not going to say anything snarky now, but anyway, so I think that the church is well positioned to really communicate well with other countries, like that lady mentioned, we're talking to Russia and things of that nature. So I know the Pope is trying desperately to do so, but it's been tough. He's in a tough position because the Pope doesn't want to name Putin and close those bridges, but at the same time it angers the Ukraine when it appears that he's being too soft with Russia. So he's trying to walk a very fine line, but it's not easy. I think a lady there had her hand up, with the mask on. Thank you for your question. That was a good question.
Thank you, Archbishop, for being a leader and lifting up this topic so that all of us we are faith people will be able to be engaged. What I was thinking is, your presentation today contextualizes what is happening right now and here in New Mexico. And I was wondering, is it possible to get a copy of your presentation today? You said that you had a lot more documentation, for example, with the bishop in Seattle. And I was wondering if I think we could have conversations by having the talk that you gave today, and we could have small groups talking about this, just saying, what do you think about this? Where are we? How do we feel? So I really think that that could be a real catalyst for conversation and listening. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I'll be happy to give the talk to Marie, and she can possibly scan it, download it, and put a link on your DEI website, so I'll give her that. I've noticed as I was going over, I noticed a little repetition, but I'm not sure if I want to take it out, because I keep mentioning nuclear disarmament, but it's like, repetition is the mother of learning. So I'm inclined just to keep it in and keep saying it over and over again, so it kind of sinks in. But anyway, I'll give this to Marie, and she can certainly put it on the DEI website. And secondly, if you go on our Archdiocesan website and just look down for I looked it up today. My nephew, who lives in Italy, he lives in Florence, Italy. Tough, lucky brat. But anyway, he got all that pasta. But I sent him a copy, but all I did was downloaded it from our website and then just sent it to him. So you just go on Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and it's like, I forget what I did now. If you look for it, it's there. You just go down, I think, in the Archbishop section, and you'll see the Peace Pastoral. You kind of have to jiggle it a little bit. You got to work through it there a little bit, but you'll see it, and then there's a click on, and the whole thing will pop up in full Technicolor. So it's, and also you can, so I recommend you do that. Go on the website, get a copy of the Peace Pastoral, and you can read the whole thing. And that's a good, there's someone in the back has a copy of it. It has a beautiful picture there of New Mexico, and looks like something near Ghost Ranch or somewhere around there, but it's a beautiful, there's some beautiful artwork in it. We have a lot of Swanson in there, and Father Bill Nichols. So there's some beautiful artwork in there, and yes, sir.
So in a follow-up to the question about engagement with the congressional delegation, have you had any more formal meetings with the leadership of the national laboratories or the Air Force Base here in Albuquerque, or with scientists who work at the laboratories, or has it been more informal one-on-one conversations so far?
So far, it's been on that level, been more informal ones, but we are working on it. As a matter of fact, we tried to get some dates. I gave Father Daniel some dates up at Los Alamos at Immaculate Heart of Mary, and the dates I gave were not, there was like vacation time during the summer, but we're going to definitely do it. And we just talked to Ann, I think a couple of days ago, we got another plan to talk to some other scientists, a group of Catholic scientists. I know some of them may be from Los Alamos, I'm not sure. But we are definitely going to do that, because I want it really to be a conversation, and not just a myopic conversation, but a broad conversation with all points of view. So I'm anxious to talk, because we're truly not afraid. It's not a debate. I'm not trying to win anything. I'm not trying to convince anybody. My feeling is that if we just speak the truth, it will speak for itself, that most rational human beings will see that it's not right that we could destroy ourselves so easily. It's a lot of people don't realize how close we've come before. Like that quote from McNamara, the 62 missile crisis. There were a couple of near misses there that were very close. We here in Albuquerque, we had a nuclear bomb dropped in Albuquerque several decades ago that didn't detonate, but if it had, I think there was only one low voltage switch that somehow saved us from, tens of thousands of people from being wiped out. So, that story of the Russian submarine officer, and his protocols were quite clear that he was to fire a nuclear arm at the United States from his submarine. But he didn't do it because he just didn't think he was uneasy about something didn't right. And it turned out he was right. The radar had read a cloud formation incorrectly, thinking it was nuclear weapons going toward Russia. So I don't know whatever, I've got to find out in my research what happened to him, because technically he would probably be executed for not, even though he saved the world from destruction, he didn't follow orders. So there are many such episodes like that. There was one, I think, was in a Tom Clancy novel even. I don't know, it was based on that reality. So good old United States, always, making a little, anyway, yeah, we do intend to do it. I'm looking forward to doing it, and I'm looking forward to learning from them. And frankly, my hope is that they'll be our most effective emissaries in this, because I think getting a scientist from Los Alamos or Sandia to promote nuclear disarmament is a pretty good, effective tool. Again, obviously, this, it would be my hope, like I said earlier, that most people in the military don't want war, because they'd be the first ones to go. So, it's my hope that the scientists don't want nuclear war either, because they know exactly what will happen more than any of us. Yes.
We've been asking you, are you going to do this and are you going to do that? But what would you like us to do? I know, for example, next Saturday at 10 at John the 23rd, we're having a gold mass with scientists and a speaker afterwards, I believe over lunch, who is going to be a woman speaker, scientist. And I was wondering, why don't you come? I'm asking you again, but what would you like us to do? Would you like us to order a bunch of those books from Pax Christi and have small group discussions so we can start revving up the conversation at our parishes? What can we do?
Well, I would say yes, yes, no, and yes. I can't,
Come
I don't
next
think
Saturday.
I would like to go. I'll check my calendar. If you'd remind Ann or me, or send me an email or something, or call Melanie at the Catholic Center if I'm available. I'm really on, between now and June, I'm really the associate pastor of St. Francis Cathedral. So the priest we had there, Father Jose Vigil, had to go back to his Pueblo diocese. So we're just really hurting for priests right now. So I'm definitely committed there. But if it's depending on the time, if I can, I will. But yes, I'm so grateful for your observation and your suggestion. I think that's precisely what we're hoping. My hope is, and we just talked about this very thing, Ann and I and Jay, and sadly Leslie lost her husband at 50 years old. Tragically, he died suddenly last week. So, but she wasn't able to be with us right this moment. But keep her in our prayers, and Tony. But anyway, we want to engage the Archdiocese. I think the way we're going to do it is through parish Catholic social teaching groups. So I think it's something that our Archdiocese can have a leadership role in. And I'm really more and more thinking this is a pro-life issue, because we're dealing with something that can destroy life. Abortion destroys life in the womb, and euthanasia destroys life for people who are terminally ill or at the end of life. And they're different, but atomic weapons destroy all of life. Actually, they destroy all sentient, everything. And then the projections now that we have from the computer projections are that, and it didn't even have to be all out, but definitely in an all out nuclear war, there'd be about 10 years of a nuclear, what do they call it?
Winter?
What is
Nuclear winter?
Yeah, nuclear winter, thank you. And so there would be, like the dinosaurs that theorized, there would be this cloud that would prevent the sunlight from getting in, so all plant life would die. So basically, most people would die of starvation. The lucky ones would die instantly from the blast. The not so lucky ones would die from radiation poisoning, cancer, and starvation. So, it's just, I don't even like to think about it, but you're talking about, we go way back to the invention of the wheel and the invention of fire. We'd have to, even if human beings, if the race somehow perdured, we'd have to start all over again from the absolute very beginning, coming out of the Darwinian slime, and try to figure out, and reinvent the wheel. And, you think of where we are from then to now, with technology and flying all over the earth and going to the moon and penicillin and everything like that, that'd all be wiped out. The Bible, there'd be no Bible, there'd be no Word of God Sunday, no churches, no religion, no life, no nothing. I don't know. I don't know what people, you have to, I keep thinking that God won't let that happen, but at least I hope God doesn't, but yes. Oh, okay, and then we'll go you next.
Oh, I didn't.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to talk about a project that had existed at Los Alamos from around 1990 to around 2012, and they had a closer.
Thank you.
Sorry. I'm not used to speaking in a microphone. The project lasted approximately 12 years, and it was started by a former lab director, Sig Hecker, he wrote a book called Doomed to Cooperate, and it was a cooperation between nuclear researchers in the United States and nuclear researchers in Russia. And they met about once a month for 12 years for a nuclear disarmament program. And the United States built a nuclear storage facility in Russia that has about 12 feet walls. I'm sorry, I've been corrected, 35-foot walls. And they have the goal, both countries were going to build one. And they were going to store nuclear warheads so that they would be dismantled and they would not be available for anything. And the project lasted for 12 years, and there was to be a dedication of this facility in Eastern Russia. And right at that time, the power in Russia went from Yeltsin to Putin. I just lost his name. To Putin. And when Putin got in power, he shut down the program. And there was going to be a dedication, and the funding for this program was funded by 2 senators, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. It was Lugar and Senator Nunn. One was Republican, the other was Democrat. And they had this, they had funding, they had connected with the scientists, and it was just a fabulous program. And right as they were having the dedication, and the teams from the United States were going to go over there, and the 2 senators were going to be there, power changed, and Putin shut down everything. So and consequently, the American team never found out what happened to the nuclear weapons, and what is the status of this? So there was a huge effort from Los Alamos, but there were people from Sandia as well as from other facilities to really make a statement about ending so the scientists don't want these weapons to continue. So that is, it's just, and there's 2 books on this project. And the head of the laboratory, I think he was on 60 Minutes or something like that to speak of it. But so it was quite disappointing to everybody involved.
Right. Well, sure it was. I think maybe that's what Marie was talking about too, that's precisely the kind of thing we need on the international level, is to have these kinds of agreements and conversations, and that will lead to nuclear disarmament eventually. So that's, please God, we can get back to that. Putin has not been a friend of the world by any means. Although I have to be clear, I got criticized the other day indirectly by someone who's evidently very pro-Russian, and they said that accusing Russia of a war of aggression is a neocon ahistorical opinion. And I thought, well, I'm not so sure about that, but I'll have to do more research. But thank you for your input. I think that would be wonderful if we could get back to that level, please God. Yes.
Thank you for your time today. I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for Archdiocese, especially with the settlement. I know you've had a lot on your plate, and I wanted to just take a moment and thank you for getting that mess taken care of, and hopefully that's behind us as an Archdiocese. My comment is that I'm really concerned with the previous administration that they pretty much gutted the State Department. And I think people are always concerned about the Department of Defense, but obviously the State Department is critical because we need to do more diplomacy. And so hopefully that we're working on trying to build up the State Department. I know from reports we lost a lot of senior people in the diplomatic channels. And that, of course, that's pretty hard to replace because usually those older people mentor the younger people, and that's a big deal. But I think we just need to pray because we've got a lot of terrible leaders out there right now that have a lot of that have these weapons, and that's, obviously we think we're going to do better by getting more, but as you said, we're just working on trying to destroy the world, and eventually that's what's going to happen. But I just applaud you for trying to bring this out, and hopefully we can all do our part and realize that this is really important.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And you're quite right. I hope we need real strong leadership in our world today, throughout the world. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of dictators assume leadership roles, and that's a real threat to the security. Our world's probably never been more connected as it is today. When you think about the Wi-Fi and all of the different technology we have, we're really connected. And sadly, we're also connected in negative ways. And so you look at the supply chain problems we had and the Ukraine war and things of that nature. So, but thank you for those comments. You're right. We need, what was it, the old Cool Hand Luke movie? What the warden said? What we have here is a failure to communicate. And so I think that maybe St. Peter's going to say that to God, our world, they're not communicating very well, Lord. What are we going to do? So that's such a true thing on so many levels, communication. My dear friend, Father Gene, always said that the inevitable outcome of all human communication is partial misunderstanding. And that's really true. And I think that it's scary when you put it on an international level because we can't afford too many misunderstandings on that level.
Well, on that note, we do thank you for communicating with us. And I think this was just really wonderful. I knew you had put the letter out. I'm ashamed to admit that I'd read a beginning of it, but I didn't make it all the way through. And I am just so appreciative of your presentation and the discussion that it engendered here. It was really, really wonderful. And I just want to remind everybody here that Father Scott Steinkirchner will be speaking at Our Lady of the Annunciation next Sunday at 2:30. We had back-to-back because the Archbishop was traveling in December, so we were able to, slot him in this slot here. And so next Sunday, and then remember that the first Sunday in March, the 5th of March, 2:30 at John the 23rd, that's when Father Gregory Boyle will be speaking.
Oh, he's very good. Yeah.
Sorry? And Father Gregory Boyle leads the largest gang intervention organization in the world and has helped hundreds of thousands of people. Homeboy Industries, exactly. And he's written several books, and so you can look him up online if you'd like to do that. The books are phenomenal, and he is so inspirational. We're very happy to have him as well. And I neglected to say my name. even though the Archbishop did. I'm Marie Levy-Ryan, and I'm the president of the board of DEI. We are so grateful for your presence here, and I know many of you have contributed. We do not charge admission. We do appreciate your donations, however, and we do want to see you downstairs for a little social after this. Thank you. Yes, out this door and downstairs.
And thanks to Father Steve Rosera for his hospitality. Very grateful to you.
Yes,
Father
thank
Steve.
you.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome.